Ladies and gentlemen, warm Pacific greetings to you all this morning. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today and like to express my sincere gratitude to the ANU's Development Policy Center for co-hosting this very important event on USP's calendar. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 9th Pacific Update Conference. In 2020, much of the world, as we know, went into lockdown. The adversities of the COVID-19 pandemic affected international travel and public gatherings. And of course, the Pacific Update was canceled, much to the disappointment of many of us. Today, we're meeting virtually, and I sincerely want to acknowledge your effort to be here. It reflects the commitment to continue deliberations on the development and research to public policy for our Pacific region, particularly in these unprecedented times where such discussions are of the essence, most especially for us as a university. These discussions today are very important contributions towards our commitment to shaping Pacific futures. This conference, I think, is a unique opportunity to share experiences and best practices on policies. Forums such as these are vital to our region. And while this is the first Pacific Update to be held online, I do hope that we'll all be able to gather again in person next year. But let me say a few things. Since 2015, the University of South Pacific has had the privilege to co-host this annual event, and 5 of the previous Pacific Updates have been held at Lothala campus in Suva. Within this time, the conference has grown in several aspects and has established itself, as I said at the beginning, as one of the leading annual conferences in the region, and many people look forward to the deliberations and the outcomes of the conference. The Pacific Update Conference is clearly an opportunity for researchers, for academics, development practitioners, and policymakers from across the Pacific to present on current research and policy analysis. And today, we have presenters from Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Tonga, Vanuatu, Australia, and New Zealand, who will, of course, present research and discuss the latest economic and social developments in the Pacific region. Clearly, there are some hotspots that I'm sure are very germane to our discussions over the next few days. And without a doubt, the most important topic as we head into COP26 in Glasgow is climate change and oceans management. And that's something I hope will be discussed over the coming days. But equally, I think, is the whole question of regionalism. I think these two things are not only dominating debates throughout the region, but also among Pacific leaders themselves. Now, this year's conference, I'm told, has 6 sessions over the next 3 days and are covering topics from politics and regionalism, food security and supply chain, gender economics, agriculture, and health systems. USP has always supported conferences of this nature, and as custodians of the Pacific futures, our vision has always been towards building innovative, cohesive, resilient, and sustainable communities, which are partly realized through this platform. Our Pacific region faces many challenges. As I've already said, Pacific Island countries are perhaps the most vulnerable in the world when it comes to the effects of climate change and disasters. Together with the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing climate and disaster shockwaves on Pacific Island countries, these continue to pose major challenges for our region. However, sustainable development driven by intensively researched public policies can provide the adequate readiness, awareness, and protection we hope to provide for our future generations. I believe that long-term cooperation, public and private sectors are all required now more than ever to work together. USP is very proud to co-host the Pacific Update, to provide that platform and to discuss and explore possible solutions to these challenges and other pressing challenges of our region. So I've said, to me, I think the two really core issues for the Pacific at the moment are climate change, and it's particularly germane that we're leading up to COP26 and the Glasgow meetings. But equally, I think there is a major crisis that faces the Pacific region, and that's namely the Micronesian decision to pull out of PIFs, and how the region responds to that challenge, and how Pacific unity and Pacific regionalism continues to be a key agenda for regionalism. Now, I have full confidence that the days to follow are packed with stimulating presentations, with insightful discussions that I'm sure is going to strengthen our collective response to the challenges we face. And with these words, I welcome you all to the 9th Pacific Update Conference, and wish you all the best of luck in your deliberations over the next couple of days. Thank you very much.
Hi, and welcome to this session of the Pacific Update. Thank you for attending. My name is Terence Wood, and I'm a research fellow at the Development Policy Centre. I've been tasked with chairing this particular session of the Pacific Update. And there's a lot I'd like to say by way of introduction to this session, but because we're pressed for time, I'm going to keep my comments short. And most importantly, I simply want to emphasize that it gives me immense pleasure to introduce our three speakers today. The first of our speakers is going to be Russel Kitau Jr. from the University of Papua New Guinea. And Russell's going to speak on a topic that is of real personal interest to me, elections in Papua New Guinea. And in particular, Russel is going to speak about some innovative public opinion research that he has conducted with colleagues looking into the upcoming 2022 elections in Papua New Guinea. Then second, Aidan Craney from the Trobe University is going to counter a common claim often made with respect to the Pacific. And this is the claim that high numbers of young people are a driver of conflict in the region. And in its stead, Aidan is going to offer a more nuanced explanation of the sources of conflict in Pacific Island countries. Then third, Henry Puna, the Secretary General of the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, is going to speak to us about the Declaration on Preserving Maritime Zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. Henry's a central figure in Pacific regionalism, and the Declaration is, of course, a vital response to the most important development issue of our times. So it's a real privilege to have Henry with us today. And what's more, Henry is going to be joined by Filimon Manoni, who's the Deputy Secretary General of PIFs, in the question time for their presentation. So those are going to be our speakers today. Before we kick off, just some basic housekeeping for you. In case you haven't already realized, this session has been recorded and it's also been made available as a live stream on Facebook. It's going to be a busy session, so I need to emphasize to our speakers that you have to stick to the 15-minute time limits that have been allotted to you. And after each presentation, we're going to have a quick 5-minute question and answer session. So for those of you in the audience, if you have a question, please type it into the Zoom chat function or raise your hand using the Zoom hand raising facility. And if we have time, we'll give you an opportunity to ask your question. And then finally, and importantly, after this session, there's going to be a Pacific Arts virtual exhibition presented by USP's Oceania Centre for Arts and Culture. So please stay online to watch that session after our speakers finish today. As I said, I promised I was going to be short, so I'm going to stop speaking now and hand over to our first speaker, Russel Kitau Jr. Over to you, Russel.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak and present on the findings of this small survey that we conducted. So yeah, thank you, Terence, for the introduction. My name is Russel. I currently tutor with the Political Science Department at the University of PNG. And this is basically what I'm presenting is basically the results of an opinion survey that was conducted by me and my two other colleagues, Michael Kabuni and Minetta Kakarere. And so that's basically what I'm going to be presenting today. And I'll just share screen with you so I can you can see the slides. I'm hoping you guys can see that, yeah?
Yes, it looks great. Thank you.
All right, great. All right, so basically, as the title of the presentation reads, 2022 PNG elections, expectations, predictions, and concerns from participants. And like I said, it was an opinion survey that we conducted in the Port Moresby Northwest by-elections. And so the by-elections, first of all, the electorate that we were doing the survey on is a fairly urban electorate. So it's one of the three electorates in the nation's capital. And the by-election was the member for the seat had passed away late last year. And so the seat was vacant. And so the by-elections were held. And then the person who gets elected in the by-elections will then serve in that seat until the next election. Yeah. So basically, that's a little bit about the by-elections. So the aims of the survey, first of all, were to we wanted to learn about the extent to which voters considered policy issues when they were voting for candidates. And just for those who maybe not really familiar with the voting system, we use a system called LPV, or limited preferential voting, in which it gives voters three choices. And so you sort of allocate your voices based on preference. And so, of course, the first being your most preferred candidate for that seat, and the second and third being your least preferred candidates. Of course, the candidate must receive more than half, which is an absolute majority, to be elected for that seat. So that was the first aim of the opinion survey. The second was to see how females might best win vote support, because we've noticed, of course, that the participation of women in politics has been quite low over the years, and of course there are no women in parliament at this in this current government. And thirdly, we also wanted to get a sense of what political parties seem to be popular in this by-election, so that we can look at maybe they might be actually popular in the next in the coming general elections in 2022. Just a little bit on how we conduct the survey. So we basically sent out the survey 2 weeks prior to the by-election, and we closed this survey a day before the voting started. So basically, we conducted it on Google Forms, and then the link was sent out to people on social media, such as Facebook and WhatsApp. And I think one of the is we lead on to talking about limitations is that because of the environment that we were in, a lot of people that completed the survey were either students who live in the area or people who worked in that area. And so from all the 120 participants that we involved in this survey, they were urban and fairly well educated, because like I said, Moresby Northwest is not a typical PNG electorate. It's a urban electorate, and so most of our findings may not necessarily be representative of the whole country, but nevertheless we hope that the by-elections provide us a chance to learn more about how voters behave in the elections. So I'm hoping you can see this graph in front of you. So this basically shows the first of our main findings in regards to the first aim, looking at what factors are really influencing allocation preference of voters. And so if you look at this graph, you'll see there are a bunch of factors that sort of surfaced as the main factors that influence policy allocation preference. First being to my far left, if you look, good policies. So if if candidates were advocating on good policies that were in line with what people thought were the needs of the electorate, whether those candidates had experience working in public and private sectors, whether they were endorsed by one of the voters' favorite parties, political parties, if they were a big man of the community, because we have this big man system in PNG that you didn't necessarily have to be a chief, but if you're a big man, people sort of follow you because of that status in society. Education level, whether or not they were educated to up to tertiary education or not. Some voters also gave votes to candidates based on if those people were from the same provinces they were, or the same regions. If they were Christians, okay, allocation based on kinship as well. And if the candidates were giving them money through bribery, and the last factor being if those candidates were female. Of course, if you can look to the far left again, you'll see that the allocation preference, I think the most significant factor we've had, at least from this survey, is the good policies factor. And so good policies followed by experience. So it's basically the graph showing that we asked voters whether they thought, whether they would allocate the preference to the first, second, and third based on what factors. And so a lot of them actually end up saying that they would give their first choice based on good policies, and then others said experience, and maybe you have endorsed by a favorite party and big men and education, and sort of some of them be kind of the same, but yeah. All right, and so like I did say before, the electorate was a fairly urban electorate, and so the level of education may have affected the responses. So of the 120 respondents that were surveyed, around 72% of those either have a degree or studying towards a degree. And when we also want to talk about issues, like I said, about the good policies factor, and what issues were candidates sort of advocating on. And so the three main issues that voters said that candidates should talk about for the Mosby Northwest electorate were law and order issues in the electorate, economic opportunities, especially for up and coming SMEs, and the creation and maybe improvement of health infrastructure and services in that electorate. The same question we asked to the voters, what issues would they think that candidates should be focusing on for the general elections coming up in 2022, and they said law and order issues again, and economic development, but this time they also added corruption. Now, female candidates, which is in regard to the second aim, in which we wanted to learn how female candidates might best win voter support. Now, from the survey, one of the things we found is that 40% of the respondents that voted in the last general elections, which was in 2017, said that they would consider allocating one of their preferences to a female candidate in the Mosby Northwest election. But 37% of that said that they would do the same in the next general elections in 2022. And so we asked those who were probably not planning to allocate a vote for a female candidate, what would it take for them to actually allocate one of their preferences in the election? And we put here two quotes, I guess, just to give us an idea of what the responses were. So the first one reads, "She must not play the gender card too much and concentrate on policy matters. Being male or female does not bring about changes we hope for, but the right person with good quality." And then one of the other participants said, "My preference on women candidates will depend on their education qualifications and political party and policies of the party that she was endorsed by, her leadership qualities, and someone who can fight for the common good of the people." Which then leads us back to the results. The results were shown on the graph that I had shown like 2 slides up, on the significance of policy issues and maybe party affiliation that can be applied to both male and female candidates when they're contesting. Now, political party popularity, we wanted to see who these voters thought the top political parties were in the elections, or who they thought they would win most seats in the 2022 general elections. And the names that were mentioned were the Pangu Party, the the Allegiance Party, National Alliance, and United Labour Party. But I think the more interesting finding from this area, which is in the next point, is that respondents were tending to associate the favorability of their party with prominent individuals. And so they gave reasons why they were selecting these parties was because they were either led by prominent individuals or they were composed by prominent individuals, some who I like to refer to as career politicians who've been in parliament for several and even consecutive governments. For example, Pangu Party is the current prime minister is part of the Pangu Party. It's one of the oldest parties, I guess, and it is the current party that it's leading the coalition that's from government. So in conclusion, our survey participants, like I said, were urban, well educated, because the electorate was urban. So also we cannot say for sure that when the voters were actually voting in the by-elections, they actually prioritized good policies as much as they said they did. But we hope that our findings can be still significant and revealing, because the voters that we included in this survey were at least aware that policies were an important factor in influencing how they cast their votes and they share their preferences when voting. But despite being our electorate being urban and a bunch of our participants being educated, a lot of them didn't actually vote for women in the last general elections in 2017, which just highlights how tough it is for the women candidates in PNG elections. Although more support from parties may actually help, considering this is also an interesting finding, considering that there's a revised law before Parliament, the Organic Law on Integrity of Political Parties and Candidates, which aims to get all political parties to ensure that at least 20% of their candidates are women. So I hope that'll be one of the things that can actually help to improve women, female participation in PNG politics. But yeah, other than that, I think that's basically about it. Of course, when we go into questions, I hope that Michael is also on this call, so in case you have any questions in regard to the survey or other things about elections in PNG, he may also be able to answer those questions. But yeah, other than that, that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Russell. So now is your opportunity. If you have any questions you'd like to ask Russell or his co-authors, please type them into the chat function or just simply raise your hand. And while you're doing that, I might ask Russell a quick question. Russell, so this was a survey that you conducted in an urban electorate, but I guess people in other parts of Papua New Guinea have access to social media. Do you think it would be possible to do something similar in the lead up to the general election, but broaden it across a wider part of the country?
Yeah, I do think it is possible because, of course, relatives that I know around who live in Papua New Guinea, even in provinces that are fairly rural, do still have access to internet. And so I do think it's possible to actually conduct a study, which would probably be more representative, I hope, if we do it in a rural electorate.
Okay, excellent. Any questions? I suspect people are still typing, but we are pressed for time. So what I think we might do right now is move on to our second speaker, Aidan Craney. So we'll hand the microphone over to you, Aidan. But if you do have questions for Russell, I'll let you have a chance to ask them when it's question time for Aidan too. So you don't have to type too quickly. Over to you, Aidan.
Thank you so much, Terence, and good to see everyone here today. I'll share my screen and I'll also just give the standard caveat that I am broadcasting from home and I live with two dogs who can be very shouty, so I apologise. It normally just means that the postman is here, but about half an hour ago, it meant that Melbourne was having its first earthquake in what I think is 8 or 9 years. So, again, if the dogs are barking, my apologies. So Nisambula Vinaka, hello Olgeta, warm Pacific greetings. Before I commence, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation upon whose lands I'm broadcasting from today, and extend my my thanks and acknowledgement to elders past and present. And I'd also like to extend my acknowledgements to all Indigenous peoples who might be watching today. I'd also like to thank ANU and USP for organising and hosting the conference this year. The Pacific Update is one of my absolute favourite conferences. I think it's a great initiative within the region, bringing together academics, bureaucrats, policymakers, practitioners, etc. And so I'm really glad that in these times we've been able to have the conference occurring. So my presentation today is based on an article that was recently published in Asia Pacific Viewpoint, drawing on data collected through my PhD fieldwork in 2015 that examined youth livelihoods, leadership and civic engagement in Fiji and Solomon Islands. In this paper, I look at causes and explanations of civil unrest in both countries. Now, the framing of the paper is ostensibly on the perception that high youth populations of the Pacific, referred to as the youth bulge, necessitate a security risk to each country and potentially to the region. This framing positions youth as deviant members of society, a trope that unfortunately seems to inform much policy and programming work towards youth in the region. My PhD, apologies, that shouldn't have moved yet. My PhD challenged this positioning, demonstrating the pro-social civic engagement of young people in Fiji and Solomon Islands. Looking back through my data with this in mind, I was also able to identify other ways that unrest has been explained and thought to explore this further, which this paper does. So based on my data, my primary arguments are as follows. Firstly, peace is the natural order of societies. Everyday living in the Pacific, and indeed throughout the world, is peaceful and orderly. The tension of Solomon Islands at the turn of the century and the political instability of Fiji since the late 1980s are notable precisely because they rupture such peace. The youth bulge does not present an inherent future security risk. Young people are not inherently violent and they do not have sociopathic tendencies. They do want livelihood opportunities though, individually and collectively. And just as ethnic tensions offer a simplistic explanation of past civil conflicts by speaking to a symptom, albeit very visible one, of unrest, real and perceived inequality are more appropriate lenses for understanding civil unrest. Unrest is most likely to occur in situations where people's expectations around livelihood opportunities are not being met, particularly if they consider that other people, and particularly other demarcated communities of people, are disproportionately receiving social and economic benefits. Policies and programs that address, sorry, my slides are moving without me there. Policies and programs that address the livelihoods needs of citizens, particularly youth, should be a cornerstone of peace building efforts. Addressing livelihoods concerns and doing so equitably should be seen as an active form of peacemaking and peace building. This is true for young people, but can be more broadly applied and should be with considerations of intersectionalities of real and perceived marginalisation. So young people have indeed been involved in multiple instances of unrest in the Pacific in recent decades. Since the turn of the century, young people have been disproportionately involved as both perpetrators and victims of conflicts of varying scale that have taken place in Fiji, Kanak, New Caledonia, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Tonga and Vanuatu. Youth bulges refer to the outsized populations of young people that often occur in developing states, where demographic indices between 15 and 35 years of age significantly outnumber all demographic indices older than 35. Youth bulge theory is often used to explain unrest in hindsight. However, the seminal study by Henrik Erdahl that coined the term found that high youth populations result in an only marginal increase in the risk of unrest. In fact, Erdahl argued that such unrest is the result of structural factors impinging on young people's abilities to engage in sustainable livelihoods and express themselves as active citizens. Such factors may include young people experiencing economic pressures combined with a lack of employment opportunities, a higher tolerance to risk due to having fewer dependents and material goods, and exclusion from decision-making processes demonstrating limited political capital. Recognising the limited increase in risk from high youth populations should not be cause for disregard, though. Reflecting on Erdahl's argument that structural factors linked to real and perceived inequalities are drivers of unrest means the focus in Fiji and Solomon Islands should be on the growing cohort of overeducated, unemployed young people. As we're all no doubt aware, Fiji and Solomon Islands have each experienced significant civil unrest in recent decades. For Fiji, this relates to multiple coups and attempted coups. For Solomon Islands, this relates predominantly to the conflict known as the tension that mainly took place between 1998 and 2003 with people from Guadalcanal and people from Minetta. Again, the reasons these examples are so notable is because they are pockmarks to otherwise relatively peaceful histories. Both the political instability of Fiji and the tension of Solomon Islands are regularly understood as resulting from ethnic tensions. In Fiji, tension is understood to exist between the indigenous Itauke and the Indo-Fijian population, which descends from forced Indian labour migration under the British colonists in the late 19th and early 20th century. In Solomon Islands, the primary conflict is understood to be between two communities indigenous to the country, the Gwale of Guadalcanal and Malaitans, who have migrated to Guadalcanal from neighbouring island, Malaita. Okay. Ethnic tensions offer an explanation for violence because they allow the identification of an other to be blamed for real and perceived inequalities. As Usaya Moldy, civil society activist from Fiji, told me, there are a lot of concerns with crime in the country and also poverty among Itauke communities. Every time you speak to them about poverty, they will say, why are the Indo-Fijians doing well? Why are we not doing well? In Solomon Islands, the demands by the bona fide and indigenous people of Guadalcanal that is seen as a precursor to the conflict, that is the document produced in the late 80s and late 90s, identified Malaitans as disproportionately reaping the benefits of development in Honiara. In Honiara, currently, the target of ethnic disparagement tends to be the ethnically Chinese population, seen as a proxy symbol of corrupt activities by local politicians. A youth informant told me, the involvement of the government with the Chinese people is getting at the nerves of the youth. And it's notable that the last major violent event in Honiara was the 2006 burning and looting of Chinatown. In fact, when I would ask people what the likely next incident of violence would be in Honiara, I was repeatedly told, we'll probably burn down Chinatown again. And just a few weeks ago, I was on a Zoom call with a friend in Honiara who was at the time watching a peaceful protest when she wondered aloud to me if she should tell her friends who work in Chinatown to leave in case the march turned violent. An alternative starting point for understanding civil unrest in each country is land rights. The 1987 coups in Fiji are widely understood to have been motivated by unease from the Itauke community that the Indo-Fijian community were beginning to outnumber them in terms of population size, political representation, and material wealth, with a fear that this would extend to co-option of the lands on which Itauke had lived, worked, and worshipped for centuries. Likewise, land rights offer a useful contextual starting point for understanding the tension. The bona fide demands explicitly called for reparations for non-Indigenous land use and greater sovereignty over land rights. But even land rights can be read as a symptom of the ensuing conflict. Scratching the surface, we can see that fears around the loss of land rights are fears around the loss of livelihoods, and the targets for ire are those seen to be benefiting. Here it is worth noting that when I asked youth activists and advocates what the greatest issue facing young people in Fiji and Solomon Islands was, the vast majority identified unemployment. even those outside urban areas who appear to live comfortable subsistence-based lives. Again, unemployment is a proxy for wider fears related to precarity. As Jack Maibuta told me, unemployment gives birth to other livelihood issues. Underscoring the suggestion that ethnic tensions have been used as a convenient narrative to distract from the real sources of conflict related to livelihoods, Kajal Kamar, a youth organiser from Fiji, told me, with young people, it's no longer to do with race, it's to do with development. The real risk for youth-led civil unrest appears to be related to a lack of opportunities. In Fiji and Solomon Islands, young people are graduating with secondary certificates and tertiary degrees into unemployment. With youth bulge demographics expected to continue in both countries for 2 to 4 generations, this issue will only be exacerbated. As I argue in an article that will soon be published in the Contemporary Pacific in coming weeks, overeducated, unemployed young people are a result of poor planning and education policies that are not suited to local livelihood needs and opportunities. This is compounded by a structural minimisation that views youth needs and issues as largely unimportant. A risk exists that if young people's actual needs are not taken into account in policy and programming decisions, and I mean this at a broad level, young people should be considered not just in relation to education policies, for example, but as a cross-cutting focus area across all policies and programming decisions of government and development agencies. The risk exists that they will be further marginalised, which will serve to increase the risk of unrest, which will reinforce perceptions of youth as a security risk and likely further marginalise them. So what to do? Firstly, recognise that peace is the natural order in Pacific communities and that this is true across demographics. Celebrate everyday peace and understand conflicts as the rupture of peace. Then, if and when unrest occurs, look for the deeper causes. Try to understand what drove people to engage in conflict, what underlies their explanations, and what safety nets were in place. That is, what did people actually have to lose by engaging in unrest? Finally, and most importantly, create policies and programs that support young people. These should be based in evidence, not thought bubbles, and I'm explicitly thinking about the abundance of entrepreneurship-focused programs that have negligible benefits that I've seen in the region. More so, the impacts of all policy and program decisions should consider anticipated impacts on benefits for young people. That is, all policies should be run through the lens of what is the likely impact on young people. If young people are helped to realise their individual and collective potential, they will act as markers of peace rather than be considered as potential threats. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Aidan. And before we go to questions for you, Surendra Prasad had his hand up right when you were starting to speak. So I suspect that wasn't a question for you, but Surendra, did you have a question for the previous speaker, Russel?
Sorry, yes, it was a question from the previous speaker, but I think he had already spoken.
You can ask it now quickly because Russell only had one other.
Previous speaker, actually, I wanted to know, he presented some of his findings that about the bribery, some money bribery to the people by the candidates who are contesting election. So I just wanted to know what is the amount, what kind of amount, or they give bribery to the voters. That's what my question was.
Russell, are you still with us? Take you off mute.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of I think someone can also answer that as well. They can sort of answer it after, if anything. But it depends. I think for the by-election there that we just had a few months ago, I heard from people that I know that they were offered like 50 kina to buy their vote. 50 kina is probably equivalent to, I don't know, less than $20. I mean, so that's basically based on my experience, but I think it depends. I think sometimes they give them gifts, but in terms of money, I think it depends. But yeah, that was just what I experienced from the by-election just recently. hope that answers your question.
Thank you for giving the idea that 50 kina about $20 means 20 US dollar, I believe, is it?
I think it's. I was comparing it to 20 Australian dollars, but
Okay, no problem. But very surprisingly, is there any way through your survey that these voters can be encouraged not to do so, because their votes are very important, you know, and they should not sell, and anyone should not sell their vote for the very small amount or even a big amount. Votes are for any of the citizen or any country. Votes are really invaluable. No? It cannot be valued in terms of money, and they are selling and giving their votes to particular candidates just in a very peanut amount of $20 or something, and 50 kina. So if there is something can be propagated, that's what I want. My suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll park that suggestion and maybe you two can talk about it later, but I don't want to cut any further into Aidan's time, and we've already got some questions.
Okay, no problem.
I see one in chat from Anna, where she asks, how do you see Australia's Pacific labour programs fitting into the picture that you've painted, Aidan? So that's the first question for you.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and there are multiple layers to how the labour program might fit into the picture, most of which are probably too in-depth to go into now about the desires of people for migration and return and remittances and things like that. What I would say, with particular reference to what I've just spoken about, is it's going to be important to consider who is given the option to engage in the labour program schemes. So if the participants are targeted from particular demographic groups, from particular ethnic groups or localized communities, then there may cause fractures. So there just needs to be consideration given to how equitable the opportunity to engage is, I guess, is the short answer to that.
Excellent, thank you, Aidan. And then we have a related question from Rose Martin, which is, to what extent you think there's much interest from governments and development partners towards funding or supporting youth development initiatives of the sort that you've proposed?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rose. So I think Rose is probably more of an expert on this than I am, but I do think there's a lot of interest at the surface level for youth policies and programming decisions that will help livelihood opportunities to kind of narrow it down. But it's I don't want to say they're paper commitments, because I do think it's deeper than that, but there aren't the mechanisms in place yet for proper engagement of young people as partners in developing those policies and programs, and frameworks for monitoring the effectiveness. So I touched briefly on entrepreneurship programs in my paper. I think I know some wonderful young entrepreneurs in the Pacific, but I personally think there are too many entrepreneurship programs. There's just not the scope to create, this groundswell of 10 or 20% of the youth population become entrepreneurs. That's not economically feasible. So I think there needs to be more of an evidence base, and there needs to be bringing in of young people to be consultants and participants in the design of these initiatives. And also looking at the positive examples that are just existing. So look at the successful youth entrepreneurs and find out, what are they doing? Have they been supported by certain programs? Have they not? And try and find out the rules of thumb that they work to.
Excellent, thank you, Aidan. And at that point, I think we'll bring questions to a close, but do have a look in chat, at the chat feed afterwards, Aidan, because your Mona Kahademazad offers a resounding endorsement of some of the points that you've made too. Not so much a question, but Mona is certainly in agreement with you. At this point in time, though, what we'll do is move over to our third speaker. Our third speaker is, of course, Henry Puna from the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat. Henry, it's great to have you with us today, and we're really looking forward to what you have to say. So I'll pass the microphone, virtually speaking, over to you now, and please start the presentation.
Thank you, Terence. To the organizers of this important annual event, the Australian National University, the University of the South Pacific, and the Pacific Research Program. Distinguished fellow panelists and presenters, ladies and gentlemen, Nisambula Vinaka Kiorana, and warm Pacific greetings from Suva. At the outset, let me express my sincere gratitude for the opportunity to present to you all today on the Forum Leaders 2021 Declaration on Preserving Maritime Zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. My remarks this morning will cover three key parts. First, our serious concerns over the impacts of climate change-related sea level rise on maritime entitlements. Secondly, the centrality of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, in providing the legal basis for the declaration. And finally, a preview of steps toward building international consensus around the key aspects of the declaration. First, the impacts of climate change-related sea level rise on maritime entitlements. The ocean and coastal seas have long been central and integral to the Pacific way of life. The ocean, as a shared resource, continues to be a source of cultural significance and inspiration. Equally critical, the ocean remains the exclusive and sole source of life and vitality for the peoples of the Pacific in their voyages of economic development and nation building. As large oceanic states within the blue Pacific continent, Pacific countries have a profound connection to and reliance on the ocean, which is at the heart of our geography, our cultures, and our economies. Our past, present, and future development are based on rights and entitlements guaranteed under the UNCLOS. As stewards and custodians of some of the world's richest biodiversity and marine resources, we have a duty and responsibility to protect, to defend, and to maintain the health and resilience of the ocean and its resources. In the context of sea level rise and the question of sovereign rights and jurisdictions under the 1982 UNCLOS, the peoples of the Pacific are peculiarly situated on the basis that the issue raises for the peoples the very fundamental question of the survival of a people. The potential loss of territory, jurisdiction, and sovereign rights would have far-reaching consequences for the region in terms of effective oceans governance, in particular conservation and management of resources, addressing maritime domain threats, food security, economic development, and nation-building aspirations. Furthermore, with the special and inextricable links with the oceans, the Pacific peoples see the ocean as a connector rather than a divider, a fact that has over centuries shaped for us a certain identity, cloaked in a rich and unique set of customs and traditions that has withstood the test of time. We too, like all parties to the convention, desire the opportunity to fully enjoy our maritime entitlements. The meaningful application of the ocean's governance initiatives, treaties and agreements, and effective enforcement of national policies and legal frameworks that currently exist to protect national entitlements generated from maritime zones is likely to be seriously challenged by the impact of sea level rise on baselines and coastlines. Clearly, the stakes are very high indeed. At their 50th meeting, which was held in Tuvalu in 2019, forum leaders once again noted with concern the threat posed by sea level rise to securing the Blue Pacific, and reaffirmed the importance of preserving members' existing rights stemming from maritime zones in the face of sea level rise. Leaders also took a step further with a profound commitment to a collective effort, including to develop international law, with the aim of ensuring that once a forum member's maritime zones are delineated in accordance with the UNCLOS, the members' maritime zones could not be challenged or reduced as a result of sea level rise and climate change. The recent IPCC Working Group 1 report, Climate Change 2021, the physical science basis, further and alarmingly confirms sea level rise as a real and pressing issue. The relationship between climate change-related sea level rise and maritime zones, including economic and strategic considerations, is therefore of fundamental importance to our Pacific region, and indeed to all coastal states. This further reinforces our call to world leaders to urgently commit to decisive climate action that limits global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This now brings me to my second message today, and that is the centrality of the Convention as the legal basis for the Declaration. On 6 August 2021, leaders marked the 50th Forum anniversary with the endorsement of the Declaration on Preserving Maritime Zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. This is a solution by the Forum that both preserves maritime zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise and upholds the integrity of and our long-standing commitment to the 1982 UNCLOS as the global legal framework under which all activities and uses of ocean space is governed. The declaration is not just another climate change-related declaration. It is a carefully drafted, targeted instrument that addresses a specific issue, the relationship between climate change-related sea level rise and maritime zones. It is, in our view, a considered, moderate, and targeted solution through a good faith interpretation of the Convention. The relationship between climate change-related sea level rise and maritime zones was not an issue that was fully addressed at UNCLOS 3, which is now of concern to all of us, and in particular small island developing states and low-lying states. But despite its inequities, the UNCLOS may be the only thing that stands between order in the uses of the oceans and the tragedy of the commons. The Forum leaders' commitment to upholding the Convention in this context underscores their commitment to the rule of law and to an established international order in the uses of ocean space. The oceans, after all, is a shared resource that requires the application of the due regard principle to promote peace and harmony in its uses. That is the essence of the declaration in this context, in promoting the notion that there shall be no derogation whatsoever in maritime entitlements under the Convention in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. Importantly, the declaration is premised on states first establishing their maritime zones in accordance with the Convention, and is firmly based and grounded in the primacy of the Convention, which is often referred to as the Constitution of the Ocean. It clarifies our collective understanding on the interpretation of the Convention and represents our formal collective view on how the rules on maritime zones are applied in the situation of climate change-related sea level rise. It is therefore our regional position that this view is consistent with and is supported by the Convention and the principles of general international law that underpin the Convention, including those of stability, security, certainty, and predictability. Emerging state practice demonstrates that as states parties to the UNCLOS, forum members have chosen to exercise their rights under the convention to delimit boundaries and to delineate their maritime zones with the objective of harnessing to the fullest the enjoyment of entitlements that are derived from maritime zones established under the convention. The conscious decision to do so is not only motivated by the desire towards this end, but equally important is the recognition of the special and inseparable links with the oceans and the vitality of peoples of the Pacific in the context of their values, traditional practices, spiritual connections handed down from past generations, and their very survival. Over the course of the last decade, forum members as coastal states resolving to protect and preserve sovereignty, sovereign rights, and jurisdiction under the convention have worked tirelessly to conclude the work on the delineation of maritime zones and on their maritime boundaries, investing substantive costs and time into this work. In global terms, our region is perhaps one of the most successful, if not the most successful. While some boundaries and discussions in the region have been difficult for obvious reasons, the region has not witnessed any major boundaries disputes, such as seen in other regions of the world. To date, out of the 48 shared maritime boundaries, 35 have been completed, and several delineations against the high seas remain to be completed. Preserving maritime zones in the manner set out in the Leaders 2021 Declaration contributes to a just international response to climate change-related sea level rise and towards the goal that our legal entitlements as sovereign nations and as states parties to the convention are not lost nor challenged due to sea level rise. The declaration endorsement on the 50th anniversary of the Forum demonstrated the important value of the Forum family and signaled a deep mutual commitment to safeguard the homes and interests of the Pacific peoples into perpetuity. In addition, there is no doubt that the declaration will serve an important building block, contributing to the development and implementation of the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent that is currently under development. In conclusion, the vision and leadership by Forum leaders with this declaration paves the way as the region now takes steps toward building international consensus as part of the overarching effort to find a global solution to the issue. As alluded to earlier, it is a clear testament to their desire to adhere to the rule of law and to participate in bilateral and international transactions under a rules-based international order in the uses of the oceans. The potential loss of entitlements to climate change-related civil rights promoted by the action of others runs contrary to the intention of the convention to pay due regard for the sovereignty of all states, to promote the peaceful uses of the oceans, the equitable and efficient utilization of their resources, the conservation of their living resources, the protection and preservation of the marine environment, and for a just and equitable international economic order, which takes into account the special interests and needs of developing countries. Ladies and gentlemen, the Pacific as a collective has not been reticent, but has been proactive in its efforts to maximize opportunities and to secure into perpetuity the maritime entitlements in the manner that they deem appropriate under international law. The 2021 Leaders Declaration underpins the region's practice to date in this regard, serving and driving global and transformative governance of the oceans. There is no doubt that the Forum membership accedes to the principle that a rules-based approach to the governance of ocean space is the more sustainable approach in the long term. After all, The object of international law is to promote global peace and prosperity. I thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Henry. Now, does anyone have any questions for Henry? Someone had already typed up a question before I asked that. I'll relay a question for you, Henry, from Sheridan Ward, who says, thank you, Mr. Puna, for your valuable and important insights. I have a question, and his question is, what do you think the role of Australia as an important member of Pacific Island Forum should be in contributing to effective ocean governance, aside from committing to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius? So that's the first question from our audience for you, Henry.
Thank you for the question. I can tell you that Australia has been and is very supportive of this declaration that was adopted by the leaders last month at their 51st Forum retreat.
While we wait for other questions, I might just extend the previous one. How about New Zealand? I'm asking as a New Zealander, and maybe if we're thinking about other countries, how confident do you feel about other regional powers such as the United States and China and Japan?
I can only speak for the membership of the forum, Terence, and I can tell you that New Zealand also was very supportive of the declaration in the retreat last month. So the forum membership is absolutely committed to the declaration and is one of the priorities that our leaders are promoting at the United Nations right now, and also one which we will promote vigorously at COP26.
Excellent, thank you. Do we have any other questions? You can either type them or raise your hand using the Zoom hand raising facility. I have to confess, I don't know how to use the facility, but you do. Please ask a question. Either way. I suspect we have a fairly shy audience, given that this is the first session on the first day of the conference and everyone's still trying to get their head around how to ask questions in Zoom conferences. So for now, perhaps, what we'll do is just bring a pause to proceedings, but I would first like to thank all of our speakers this morning. Well, it's this afternoon in New Zealand, this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are. I'd just like to thank all of our speakers for their input into the presentation today. I'd also like to thank everyone who asked questions. And I'm very grateful for your insights, and I've had an opportunity to learn already. So that's a good start for the conference for me. So thank you very much. And please stay online if you're interested in seeing the arts and culture virtual presentation. Okay, thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon from Fiji. My name is Lincoln Vivakauta. I'm from Tonga. I've been an artist at the Oceania Center for more than 20 years. Now I'm a research student, a PhD research student at the University of South Pacific. The overall topic is, today is contemporary art in small development states, which is partly related to part of my research on the language of appreciation for art for my PhD. My format for today, I got 7 minutes presentation followed by an 8-minute video. So I'll be talking a little bit fast just to catch up. The 8-minute video will be, there will be a link to the exhibition if you want to watch it later, and an email if you want to purchase some of the art in the work. It will be provided by Mr. Ari Chika later. I got 7 minutes for each of the days. Day one will be the context of contemporary art in small island states. And tomorrow will be artist representation. It's looking at artists living in the island versus specific artists in diaspora, and looking at the consequences, economics, and representation. And day 3 will be what are the potentials and the creative inspiration. That's for on Friday, potential and creative of artists living in the islands. So without further ado, the context of art, contemporary art in small islands. It's like art is a vast topic. Given the time limit, I'll try to be succinct as possible in what I can say about contemporary art in small island nations. Contemporary arts, and it's not well known. We look at art, our traditional art, it's well known to us and our people. It fits into our culture, it fits into what we do. We know its functions, and we also put dollar value. We appreciate so much. We understand a lot of it. Contemporary art, on the other hand, is not widely known. We brought that from the Western world. So usually people do not look at it as, or understand it as much within our cultural context. So partly, of course, because there is a lack of art education in our context. What I mean by that, lack of art education in our context is designing art that is, let's say, for example, let's take Fiji, for example. Fiji used to have the Fiji Institute of Technology. Okay, they offered a vast program in terms of certificate, diploma, and moving into a future degree. However, when I look at the program in that time, it was more or less an art school overseas. The thing is, when students graduate from that program, they know how to create art. They do not know how to survive in our context. So what we're proposing is that art education need to be developed purposefully. You cannot bring an art education from New Zealand or Australia and try a lump sum to carry it out within the nation. It won't work, because a lot of students who graduate with that program comes out and it, okay, what do we do now? So art programs should be tailor-made to fit our context, the way and how we think. So, and then there is also a lot of artists that focusing within the island nation. Is the bread and butter issue. We find it in Samoa, Fiji, Tonga. It's the bread and butter. Whatever sell them the most, that's what the artists concentrate on selling. So the bread and butter issue. So it doesn't really help the art, but we have been doing that for a long time, because, you know, when your kids try for food, what you sell is better the most. So, and it's also, there is that big fight about the mentality of our people towards art. Our mentality of our people towards art is, you do art when you fail academic studies. So fighting that mentality contributes to a lot of not investing in art because it's not that important. And another point also is the usefulness of it. Usefulness is a concept within the practicality of small island nations. It's like, when we look at our traditional art or our heritage art, we find it useful. It fits into our purpose. So the idea of usefulness, when it's applied to contemporary art, is what's that for? I feel like you do. I mean, growing up as a kid is like when you try to do art or paint, you got told in a very harsh voice, go find something useful to do. Stop that. So even I became an artist. It's like you meeting your family later. There's a, when are you going to find a real job? So that mentality of useful, the idea of usefulness is, even you as a student, when you come to university, you do not come to educate for yourself. You come to be educated, to be used for your family, your extended family, what we call in Polynesia, the Ainga, the Kainga, in Fiji, or the Matangal, onto the church. So usefulness is very important, whether it's art or yourself. And finally, our economic situation. Economic situation play an important role in anywhere in the world. Once the GDP goes down, the funding for the arts goes down. But you look at Pacific Island nation, there's hardly a budget for the arts, apart from New Zealand. Well, they are well endowed economic neighbors. I mean, PNG, Yeah, they might have money for the arts. So basically, we are also in the last point we're talking about. We within the Allied Nation in our very incomplete visual arts system. So in here we operate within this system. The smaller the country, I'm going to pick up because my time is running out. I'm going to talk really fast. The smaller the country, the more red it is. The blue is existing, the red is limited and need development. So we'll just pick Fiji for example. If you go to Kiribati, Tuvalu, it's more red. We move to PNG, New Zealand, and Australia, it's more blue. So these components inside work together to develop the arts, the market, the university. So that's what I mean about here. So think of it this way. Most things operate in a system like economics, that we all know this, educations, education in a system. You need teachers training, you need classroom, you need textbook. All these things work together to produce a product called a student. Even rugby, we have fields, we have development. Unfortunately, when we look at art in smaller nations, we don't look at it as a system so that we can develop those within the system. We just look at it, how much can we make out of this? Here it comes the tourist boat, get the artists to sell to the tourists, let's make some money. So the majority of that is what's happening within island nations. So proposed future look is like, we should develop the system within it to create discourse. There are 3 universities in Fiji. None of those, USP, Fiji National University, University of Fiji, none of them create art discourse. I'm not talking about profiling. None of them create art discourse. And we have to look at the art market and the public gallery. The art market determines the price, and we need to develop the fine art market. But we also need public or walk into a public.
Hi, Lingy. Can you hear us, Lingy? Sorry about that, everyone. I will just try to get Lingy back in. But otherwise, I might start showing you the exhibition we have. Hi, Lingy, can you hear us?
Yes.
Hi, Lingy.
Hello.
Great, so you just drop out. So if you could start sharing your slide again, that will be great.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I think you just lost the connection for a second.
Wait, let me. You mean
No
in the
problem.
share screen?
Yes, please. Thank you.
This one?
Yep. And then I think the second last one.
This is the second last.
Yes, please. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, if you'd like to continue with the presentation, that'd be great. Thank you.
This is the last one that I was doing, and I finished, and then I move into this one. That's for you. Can you play the video now?
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes, that's
Okay,
it.
thank you.
that's the exhibition. Thank you very much. For those who are asking the question where they can buy these works, Ari will be providing the emails and the contacts. Ari Chika will do that. We give that to you later. Thank you.